Hello and welcome to Intentional Camera Movement Tips, or as it's often known, ICM. So this little video is going to deal with what it is, why you might want to get involved with it, and of course how to do it. And the how is going to share the tips. So firstly, what is it? So intentional camera movement is an abstract style of photography that has no rules. It all comes down to moving your camera during a long exposure. Okay, more of that in a bit. You could say that ICM is creating photos by painting with light. And here's a good example which we're going to talk about a little later on. So why might you want to get involved with ICM? I think there's three main reasons. You've heard about the technique and you're interested in developing your skills. You like creatively exploring new things to do with your camera. Or you like the idea of creating photos that can convey an emotion or feeling, and ICM can certainly do that. ICM being a form of abstract photography, it concentrates on shape, form, colour, line and texture. Often the viewer is left wondering what the original object was. So it's not about the literal view. You're introducing the viewer to an emotional link that you felt when you created the photograph. So when you look at or engage with abstract art of any type, you're meant to enjoy the way it makes you feel. It's more about the feelings that the photo generates for ICM than recognizing the original subject. So creating abstract images is a work of imagination and your emotional connection as a photographer. So how do you do it? 5 tips to help you. And here they are. So we're going to look at camera kit choices, how you set your camera up, types of movement you could consider experimenting with, and subject choice, and finally, how to create mindfully. So let's get into that. Number 1, camera kit choices. First up, you can use any camera at all where you can control its shutter speed. That could be a DSLR, mirrorless camera, an advanced compact, or even your smartphone if you've got an app which allows you to control the shutter speed and it's not too bright. Or of course a film camera. All of those are suitable as long as you can control the shutter speed. What lens can you use? Well, any lens will work. It's more important that you have a vision for the final photograph, that you consider the framing of it and all of the compositional guidelines. So you could use a wide angle lens, you can use a telephoto lens, or anything in between. I use both. I generally use my prime 35mm lens, which is 50mm equivalent, but I also have a small telephoto I could use as well. With those 2 lenses, I use a neutral density filter. So if you consider getting one of these, you may see that they're called by these numbers, ND for neutral density, and then the numbers 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. They go up in multiples. So ND2 is 1 stop of light held back from the sensor. ND4 is 2. ND8 is 3, and so on. And a stop of light will help you to create slower shutter speeds. More of that in a bit. So this is an essential bit of kit. I use a 3 to 7 stop adjustable filter and a 10 stop filter. Both of those work for me. I would recommend the 3 to 7 stop adjustable if you haven't got one yet already. A tripod is an optional extra. Some of the movements we're going to talk about later, particularly horizontal movements and vertical movements, may produce cleaner, sharper, more interesting images if you use a tripod rather than moving handheld. I'm going to give you some examples of that in a short while. Number 2, camera setup. So as you can see from this photograph here, I have my camera set up in shutter speed priority. Using a Fuji, all the buttons are on the top. Your digital camera may change it to TV or S to indicate shutter speed, and then make adjustments using the buttons on the back of your camera. But you need to be in shutter speed priority. Beyond that, you can have everything else in auto. ISO is one that you can have in auto, but you might want to take control of that to control the digital noise that you're receiving on the sensor. Aperture, though, really doesn't matter. So it's an opportunity there to control the light by choosing the aperture yourself. So aperture auto is fine, but if you want to control the light and to help you get the shutter speed that you want, that may be something you could take control of. White balance in auto and shoot in RAW. That will give you the opportunity to edit the photos with regard to exposure, contrast, colour in something like Lightroom, which I'll mention at the end of this presentation. So what shutter speed should you use? Kind of depends on your subject and the speed of your movement, but somewhere between 20th of a second and 1 second is probably going to be ideal. I use a 1 second shutter speed most of the time. And what about your types of movement? So you can have these types of movement: horizontal, vertical, circular, or different swoops, twists and turns, or you can merge the whole thing. I'm going to show you some examples of some of that in a minute. So, and some examples of horizontal movement here. As you can see by the text, this shot was created handheld, 1 second, using my 10-stop filter. So as you can see, it's pretty damn straight, really. I mean, I probably could have done a cleaner job with a tripod, but I really did concentrate about keeping my movement as parallel to the horizon as possible. Alternatively, you can use a tripod. So this one uses a tripod, a longer exposure, because it was quite dark, not much light, and I was quite new to ICM, so I didn't really know what shutter speeds worked most effectively. But you can see the horizon line is very clean. You may also notice in the top left-hand corner where the horizon line is a light shadow of the coast. So I probably moved the sweep of my whole movement of on the tripod a little bit too far. Something you need to think about. Another example of horizontal movement, handheld this time, for 1 second, but no filter, because it was actually indoors. Although it looks like a sea scene that was deliberate, this was created inside a multi-storey car park, using the cars, tarmac, and some of the lines that were painted there, with the intention of creating landscape type scenes. So number 4, your subject choice helps you to do these things. And there are 5 things you need to consider. You need strong subjects. You really need to think about the light, type of light, the direction, where it's coming from. You need to think about the colours that are present in your frame. And those 2 things will help to create contrast and and it's contrast that will make your subjects stand out. And of course, no type of photography is going to create interesting images unless you at least consider the compositional guidelines and decide whether you're following them, which ones you're following, and which ones you're deliberately breaking for creative reasons. So let's have a little look at more of those with some examples. So a strong subject. I went down to a local castle to create these photos here, and because I knew it could be a strong subject. This particular photo was created using a swooping movement, handheld, 1 second, using the 10-stop filter. They're quite ghostly, isn't it? Then you need to consider the light, the direction of the light. Now in this example, it's overhead. This is a bright, warm, late spring, early summer day. Lots of harsh, contrasty light and a circular movement, handheld, using my 10-stop filter for about a second. So circular movement, like this, just moving the camera like that. Colour. So in that last example, you could see they were very carefully chosen, the colours I was using. And once again here, so again, this is horizontal movement, handheld, 1 second, no filter. Because again, this was created in that car park. So again, with the intention of trying to create a landscape image. And I think I've succeeded, apart from maybe the Black Sea, as it looks like here. So contrast helps define your subjects and create interest in your photograph. So there's a story to this little image too. Vertical movement, handheld, 1 second, 10-stop filter. But I've been walking through this forest for a while, searching for straight trees and a contrasty place. And it was quite a dull day. But during the walk through the valley, the sun broke through and it started to shine on some of these straight poplar trees. So creating the effect on the left particularly, you can see on that image there. I created one in portrait format as well, because I felt that left-hand side was the stronger side as well. But I'm using this one to illustrate because it fits the screen better. And then the compositional guidelines that you can follow. So for example, this image here, whilst I've used a twisting, swooping movement and it's handheld, 1 second, then stop, filter, it follows compositional guidelines. It's pretty much in thirds with the main subject on one of the intersections. And the land kind of leads to it as well. I love the muted tones here. And again, that's the same subject as the earlier castle image, but taken from a different point of view. More on that in a moment. Finally, on these 5 tips, create mindfully. Now, what do I mean by that? So I mean that you create several or many exposures from one point of view. I'm going to give you an example of my castle shoot in a minute. So you go to a location, you choose one point of view, and you create dozens of images in that location. And each time you look at the image you create, and you decide from each photo whether you need to make any changes to exposure, the framing, or later your point of view. So each time you do that, so press the shutter, review the image, decide what worked, what didn't work, think about your movement, what are you changing? And you do that as a mindful practice. Let me give you an example. So here, I was at this location. I was probably there for about an hour, and I took photos from several different points of view. These 4 are just 4 examples from 34 exposures taken from one location, which experiment with different framing, different movements, different exposure. All 1 second, all using the 10 sub filter. And each time I'm looking at what I'm getting, how the light is creating painterly effects, and what I like and what I could change. Each time reviewing the photo and making those changes. And then, of course, I come back home and I have, as you can see right near the bottom there, from the whole shoot I was out, I had 233 photos, which probably isn't that many, really. I'm quite discerning about what I'm doing. But this is a screenshot of some of those castle images taken at 2 points of view, actually. And you can see there's a lot of examples. Why use Lightroom? Well, in Lightroom, you can then adjust contrast, exposure, colour. Yeah, you can make little adjustments to kind of reflect what you think you saw and enhance that feeling a little bit more. So I do recommend you shoot in RAW. So there we have it. In conclusion, my 5 tips for you. Think about your camera kit choices, your camera, your lens, your ND filter, whether you're going to use a tripod or not. Think about your camera setup, shutter speed priority. Are you going to take control of the ISO and the aperture, or are you going to let the camera do that? Think about and experiment with different types of movement. There's nothing that's wrong here. There's no right or wrong. There's no rules. See what you can create. And then your subject choice. Go for strong subjects. Things that are going to produce contrast, light, colour, and you can use them, follow the compositional guidelines. And then finally, as you're at your location, create mindfully. In one point of view, create many images, reflecting on each one as you create them as to how that could improve your next image. So, what we need now is an on-location shoot, where I go through some of these tips on location. That's the next video. I'll see you there. Bye for now.